Welcome, Emily. I'm so excited to have you on. You did something that absolutely blew my mind, and I'm so excited to talk about it. So, you are a women's weight loss coach, and you help them to make lifelong changes and not the quick fix. If you could just tell my viewers a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into that, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So my name's Emily Iboa, and I am a macro coach. So I guess for the past 20 something years, I homeschooled my kids. I taught Spanish. I did a lot of teaching. And then as my kids were growing up, I kind of was at a place where I just wasn't very happy with the way that I looked, the way that I felt. And I've always been a pretty active person, eaten healthy, quote unquote healthy, but my body never looked the way I wanted it to. And I just would exercise all the time and just kind of felt like it just wouldn't work for me. So I hired a macro coach. I guess it was 2021, somewhere in there, and went through the reverse diet process with her. And I was blown away because I lost 11 pounds just in the reverse. So, and what that looks like. So for me, I had learned about macro counting. I don't even remember where, but I had learned about it. And I'm a pretty type A firstborn kind of a person. So I was pretty meticulous. At least I felt I was. So I think I found like about where I should eat based on, I think, my Fitness Pal's recommendation. So I had been eating probably like 1,400 calories for a while, and I had lost a little bit of weight from that. But when I went to my coach and I did the reverse diet, she started me initially at like 1,200 calories and worked up from there. And so every week or two or something. And it was just crazy to me because I started feeling better. I started losing weight. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, what is this? Because I don't know. It just seemed so counterintuitive to me.
Yeah.
So, wow,
Wow.
that
That
is
is
so,
so
yeah.
fascinating. I have like a million questions. So, because I feel like a lot of women are stuck in the cycle of not eating enough. And at 1,400 calories, you think that's enough, but you're probably also working out and,
Yeah.
exercising. And it's so counterintuitive. And it takes such a mindset shift to think that eating too little could actually be blocking you from losing weight.
Yeah.
And so, like, first of all, what did it feel like to start increasing your calories? Like, how did that? Because I know on your podcast, you talked about how it was scary and that was a big
Yeah.
like thing to overcome. So can you talk a little bit about that, what
Yeah.
that felt like?
Yeah, it definitely was scary. I thankfully the macro coach that I hired was actually a high school friend of mine, so I had some trust in her. But I think it definitely was a scary process because everything you hear is always, you should eat as little as possible, move more, eat less, move more. And so I think it helped that I had a little bit of trust in her, but it definitely was scary because I couldn't quite understand why that would work, when nothing else had. So that was because I love learning, and I don't know, I just kind of dove into it and I learned everything I could. I read everything I could about why this would work, and I was just fascinated. And so that
Yeah.
whole process really was kind of what sparked me to want to
Wow.
help other women, because I just felt like there's so many people that struggle with the same thing that I struggled with, and
Right.
and just don't know what to do. So,
Yeah. So how long did that process take from going from 1,200 calories? And then what did you, I know you talked about how you found your metabolic capacity
mhm.
at some point. Did you start from 1,200 and then go up to your metabolic capacity? And what was that? And how long did that take?
Yeah. So for me, and everybody's a little bit different, but for me, it probably took about 6 months.
Oh,
And so it was that slow increase. So metabolic capacity. So in in case anybody doesn't know, when you look at someone's maintenance calories, what it takes to maintain their weight, it's based on a bunch of different things. It's based on their basal metabolic rate, which is actually the bigger driver of their calories that they can eat. And it's also based on their age, their weight, how much exercise they do. But I was just floored because the biggest part of your metabolism, or your, excuse me, your maintenance calorie range is your, basal metabolic rate. And then you have your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So just movement, daily movement, like doing laundry, things that aren't necessarily exercise. And then you also have the thermic effect of food. So it costs calories essentially to burn,
Mm.
the food that you eat. So you have that. And then the smallest piece is your exercise, and
Yeah.
which is crazy. Because it has so many different components, maintenance is a range for people. And so
Mm.
it's not to say that if your maintenance is 1,800 calories, that you only will burn that much per day. It kind of, you have kind of a range based on how much movement you do in that day, different factors, how much you eat, all of
Yeah.
that. So I would say what it does when you increase those calories is it really helps to push that metabolic threshold, because it gets everything kind of upregulated. Because when we chronically undereat, we basically downregulate all of our processes. I mean, it really does such a number on us. And often, too, a lot of times when we chronically undereat, we have chronic stress, which can really hinder someone's ability to be
Mm.
able to lose body fat, which is also really tough for women. So,
Yes, that's what I feel like I'm running into a lot with clients is they don't realize that they're under eating and how that is preventing them from losing weight. And from my perspective, when I always look through the lens of the MTHFR and liver and gallbladder, tell me, why do you think it's hard to lose weight when you're not eating enough? And my theory is that your body sort of starts turning things off that it doesn't need, and maybe one of those is detox.
right.
And so you end up with maybe a buildup of cortisol and estrogen, and those are kind of fat storage. But I mean, you have a lot of knowledge. Like I can just tell from your podcast that you know quite a bit about how the body works metabolically. So what do you think is happening when somebody is not eating enough,
Yeah.
and why that they're storing fat?
So when someone doesn't eat enough, basically your metabolism is a stress barometer. So if
Mm.
you are chronically undereating, your body is smart, and actually its job is to keep you alive. So if if you're not having enough coming in, then you really don't need to be burning excess energy that's stored. So,
Mm.
it's kind of that kind of it's like kind of counterintuitive, because we think that it's going to work, but it actually is our body trying to protect us. A lot of women too, if they chronically undereat for a long time, they can lose their monthly cycle. They can
Mm.
have brain fog. They can have brittle hair and nails. There's so many things. Thyroid problems. I mean, the list goes on, really. Like feeling
Yeah.
chronically like cold. A lot of that will happen. So yeah, and I think a lot of times too, women don't see the correlation between the two. And so
Yeah.
yeah,
And when you talked about metabolic capacity, that was such a concept I'd never thought about before. Like we all kind of have this threshold. Like what would that look like if we actually ate to our capacity? How much more could we tolerate? And maybe people are so, they're stressed because of stress going on in the environment. But I was thinking about how food itself is kind of an adaptogen, and it
right.
helps you tolerate more stress.
Yeah.
And, you know, kind of like the other side of the coin where your metabolism is a barometer of your stress, but then also if you're eating more, you can have a higher tolerance for
Right.
stress almost. And so that was just so interesting to me. So does everybody have a metabolic capacity, and where do you think most women, like where is their top, or is it unlimited? Where do you think they
Everybody
land?
has, a maintenance. The thing that what I think, and I have a couple different theories on this, but what I honestly think is, because like when I did my reverse at the top of my reverse, so to go back a little bit, as I worked up in calories, I got up to, I think it was almost 2,200 calories. And this was before I started strength training. I was walking a lot, but
Mm.
that's really it. That at that point, I was very full, like very stuffed, but ravenously hungry, even, like before I would
Mm.
eat. So I was just shocked, because I could tell that my metabolism was firing a lot
Yeah.
higher than it had been. And so I think that what we need to realize too is our bodies will adapt. So it will adapt to lower inputs given, but it also can adapt a little bit to higher inputs given. However,
Mm,
when we have more energy, and if we're incorporating strength training, we can build more muscle. And
mm,
when we're under eating, our body isn't going to prioritize putting on muscle tissue, and muscle is metabolic tissue. So if you are eating enough and you're lifting weights and you're kind of doing all of those things, you're likely going to have hypertrophy or muscle building happen, and that will actually increase your basal metabolic rate, which is that big driver
mm.
of your maintenance. So I kind of
Okay.
think, it might be has a little bit more to do with that. But also, the other piece that I feel like is really something that a lot of women struggle with is I feel like I feel like that we have in our head what we're eating. So if we're always in a
Mm,
restrictive mindset, even if we're snacking sometimes, or, taking bites, licks, and tastes of things, we still in our head are in a diet. So we may not realize
mm.
sometimes how much we're actually eating. And that's kind of where I'm like, I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
that if it's just that eating, like allowing yourself to eat a little bit more, just helps you to be more adherent. I mean, that could be a
Hmm.
piece of it too. So,
Yeah. And I was also thinking that, women are so afraid to gain weight. And so they tend to want to do keto and fasting. And then that kind of can put people in this binge restrict cycle.
yeah.
And that is so different from eating in a way that supports your metabolism.
Yeah.
Like if you get into a restriction, I mean, eventually you're going to have a day where you just like, you can't do it anymore.
Right.
And then you end up binging. So you've suppressed your metabolism. And then that's where the weight gain actually comes from, rather than, because there's such a difference from, I think I call food is medicine, medicine is food. So we
Yeah.
should dose our food throughout the day like medicine. And that is such a different way of eating than, binging and or restricting and binging.
Yeah.
So, okay. So if you have somebody that comes to you, she's been stuck, she can't lose weight. She thinks she's only eating 1,200. Maybe she doesn't know how many calories she's eating. What are some of the first things that you look at or that you talk to women about
Yeah.
when they want to make these changes?
So I have them log their food for about at least a full week so that I can kind of see where they've been. And then I just like to ask them a lot of questions about their dieting history, about their food preferences. And I try to do kind of an incremental approach to it, to where we start out. I do start a lot of clients with a reverse diet, just because I feel like I call it kind of like a metabolic priming part of the process, because what I do is I run them through the nutrition periodization process. So basically, it's going to be periods, most of the year should be spent at maintenance, where your body's going to be able to thrive. And then your dieting phases should be short. And so that's kind of where I start, is if they have been under eating, I'll start them on that metabolic priming phase. So I'll start them a little bit, usually 300 to 500 calories below their maintenance, and then work them up. And then I try to push them as high in calories as possible before entering a diet phase, if their goal
Mm,
is to lose fat. And
yeah.
so that, and that the time frame, that's the other thing that I think is hard for a lot of women, is that we want it to happen so quickly. But fat loss and fat gain are actually slow processes. A lot of times when you have those quick fluctuations, they're actually more attributed to water than
Mm,
fat. So
mm,
so I try to really coach them along that process, that it's going to be, the long-term process for life, because I really want women to see that a quick fix is only going to be that, and it's not going to stick around. So I work with them to develop habits that will help to
mm.
keep that results for them.
Yeah,
So
that's so good. I know it is quite a mindset shift to go from women who are constantly restricting to then just being at maintenance, and then you only dip down into a deficit for a short period of time.
yeah.
So you talked about there's kind of four phases of nutrition or dieting or maintenance. Can you talk about those phases a little bit?
Sure. So the reverse that we've been talking about today. So like I said, it's kind of twofold. So you have the metabolic priming piece, where you're upregulating your metabolism, and then it is also the vehicle that you get from the bottom of a caloric deficit back up to maintenance. So then you have the caloric deficit. So that's where you are under eating, or you're eating under your maintenance calories. And I try to keep women above their BMR calories. But it just varies based on everybody. But so that's the caloric deficit, and that is how you lose body fat, is eating in a caloric deficit. And then the other phase is maintenance. And so that's, like I said, that range that your body is happiest at. And it's based on so many different factors, and it's very individualized, but that's one phase. And then you have an optional surplus or a bulk phase. So why would someone want to do that? To put on muscle, so if a woman really wants to build muscle, you can build muscle in maintenance, but it's a lot quicker in a surplus. And so if someone was to want to go into a surplus for a time, usually a few months, then once they were done with that part, then we could put them into a caloric deficit to kind of reveal that muscle that had been built. So yeah, so those are the pieces.
That's so interesting, because I think most women just think about, either dieting or just eating whatever you want. And we don't realize that there's actually a science behind it. And when you understand that, I just think it's so powerful to know that your body likes maintenance. Get your calories, like you got to have a maintenance in order to have a deficit.
Right.
Because if you're eating 1,200 calories, there's nowhere to go from there.
Like 100%.
There's just absolutely nowhere to go. So what are some of the first signs that women start experiencing when they start eating more, or the way that you encourage them to eat? What are some of the, because they want the quick fix, like the weight loss, but there's so many other things that happen before that. And what do they notice?
Yeah. So a lot of times, that's another piece. What I check with clients is their biofeedback. So those are going to be things like sleep, hunger, stress, just how you feel overall, energy, digestion, recovery. So when you're exercising, how you recover. And I can pretty much say across the board, almost every client I've worked with so far has said they have had increased energy. Most of them end up sleeping better. And it's really interesting because, you think you go into a program for one thing, and then you have all these little epiphanies along the way. And so I find that a lot of the ladies will just one of my clients last year, she said, I never realized like how hard of a time I was having getting up out of my chair. And I was actually in a lot more pain than I realized until I wasn't. And I was like, that is so interesting. So probably, reduced inflammation from that. But also just they start to learn what their body likes, and also foods that make them feel good versus foods that don't. So I find most of them will start making better choices overall. And I do try to coach them through making whole food choices, while still allowing some treats sometimes, but just making it doable. But for the majority, eating more low glycemic carb sources and things that are whole foods. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to see some of those improvements that really have nothing to do with the scale. So
it's fascinating. Yeah. And talk about a little bit about the scale. So how do you measure progress? Do you use a scale? Do you use measurements? What do you use?
Yep. So when a client starts, I highly encourage scale weight and measurements. And I really like it if they're willing to take photos, if it's not triggering for them. It is for some women. So I kind of leave that up to them, but I definitely, especially measurements, I think those are a lot more important. The scale is probably the least accurate data point, in my opinion. It's going to fluctuate, like we talked about, just based on how much water, how many different things you've, been doing throughout the day, even exercise, because there can be inflammation from that. So I have ladies, I try to have them weigh every day though, so that they can start to see that. And then I have them take measurements weekly or bi-weekly, just depending on how, they're doing with things.
Fascinating. That's such a good idea. So you actually overcome the scale by seeing how it fluctuates. And so you kind of disconnect from the scale because you see. And I just recently, so I used to never weigh myself. And then I got a biometric scale because I wanted to see, I wanted to show my clients how my weight fluctuates, even though I'm really consistent and diligent with all of my habits.
Yeah.
And my weight goes up and down by 1 pound to 2 pounds every day.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
it's,
It's so the scale is such a trigger for so many people,
I know.
So
Yeah. I call it a soul sucking activity, kind of, because it's like you step on there and you think you did so well and you're going to be down and then you're up a
I
pound.
know. Yeah. It's
So,
well,
and then it can ruin your day.
it really can. And I think too, like one thing I notice with ladies is as they go through the process, and even I even have had a few women who their scale weight maybe hasn't changed a lot, but their clothes fit differently. They start to like have to buy a smaller size, or they're, have to have their rings resized or different things like that. And so I think that when you look at lots of different things, it's not so you realize that it's not as accurate. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. So is there anything I didn't ask that you wanted to explain or talk about before we wrap up? Like, was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I would just encourage women if you haven't ever tried doing this and you've really struggled, just to give it a try, because I think that we can't really lose anything by, except for losing weight, but we can't really lose anything by giving it a try. And I really try to work with ladies to teach them to look at all of the information as data and to make tweaks from there, because if it doesn't work, then maybe you start to pivot and you start to see what will work for you, because I think that's one thing that we want things to be a one size fits all approach, like keto, like you said, all these fads, and there just isn't one approach, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody is so individual, and food sensitivities are different for people, and I'm sure you
Mm-hmm.
see this a lot with what you do too. So I think that
Yeah.
we just need to realize that we have to be our own advocate in that regard.
Yeah, that is such a good point. Like, what do you have to lose by giving your body more energy?
Yeah.
What do you have to lose? Like, if you are supplying the right energy, you're only going to be turning on more of your body functions.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to gain weight. Although I did have one more question. So
Yeah.
there are some women who are very like um they're insulin resistant
Hmm.
and so they can't tolerate fruit or root veggies or carbs.
Hmm.
So how do you work around that as you're increasing calories?
Yeah.
Is there anything you do?
Yeah, I do have a little bit of a different kind of macro profile for someone with insulin resistance. And I actually see that a lot because insulin resistance increases, the likelihood of it increases as we get older. And so a lot of women getting close to like perimenopause or menopause years will start to experience insulin resistance. So just working on even like monitoring their blood sugar, or just choosing low glycemic carbs. There's a few different things that I will work with them to do,
Mm,
to
okay.
help them to become more
Yeah.
insulin sensitive, which is the
Yeah.
goal. But I mean, and really, like, I feel like a lot of times when they start making these positive changes, and like you said, implementing habits, like that are going to serve them, then their body does start to respond a little bit better, where maybe
Hmm.
it wouldn't didn't want to previously.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah.
Well, this is so fascinating. I've loved this so much. I've sent your podcast to so many
Oh,
people.
thank you.
It's just like it blows my mind that you increased your calories and you lost weight. Like, what?
It-
So, but yeah, so how can people find you if they want to get a hold of you, track you down, and
oh, thank you.
get you as a coach?
I would love that. So you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Emily_Iboa_coaching. And I don't currently have a website, although I'm working on that. And I have a podcast called Point of Pivot. It is on Apple Podcasts and Spotify right now. So yeah, I would love to hear
Okay.
from anybody that has questions,
Well,
or yeah. But
wonderful. Well, this has been such a treat, and I hope we can do this again. And
yes.
just so thankful for your time today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really
Yeah, you
appreciate you, and
bet.
I've learned so much from you
Yes.
too. Your
Oh,
clients are
really?
lucky.
Oh, thank you so much.